And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much indeed for joining us in this webinar on the topic of collaborative working and thinking across all levels of the education system. This is the second in our series of webinars presented by the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. My name is Diana Murdoch, and I will be moderating today's session. Thank you again for joining us. I would like to briefly tell you a little bit about the project that this webinar forms part of. The project is the Combating Disparities in Access to Inclusive Education in Portugal, Italy and Spain. And it is a technical support instrument funded by the European Commission's SG reform. The project aims to promote equal access and combat regional disparities in implementing inclusive education provision across these three countries, and the webinar is part of the project's capacity building phase. For those of you who are not familiar with the European Agency, I would just like to give a little bit of background about that. We are a technical provider in this project, working closely with SG Reform and the education ministries. The European Agency is a platform for collaboration and peer learning in its over 13 member countries. The aim is to help countries improve their inclusive education policies. The European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education also cooperates with international organisations and engages educators, experts, learners and families to ensure high quality educational opportunities for all. In order to give you a little bit more information about the agency, we'd like to show you a very short video about our work.
In an inclusive classroom, learners can grow alongside their friends and peers. The opportunity for everyone to work as a team and build lasting relationships is a cornerstone of an equitable educational environment. The European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education supports ministries of education as they put this ideal into practice. We provide a platform for collaboration, working with over 30 member countries to ensure high-quality educational opportunities for all learners. The agency fosters transnational cooperation with organisations like the European Commission and the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, as well as educators, experts, learners and their families. Together, we work towards inclusive education throughout Europe. To realise our vision, we have built a peer learning framework. We create ways for member countries to exchange knowledge, combining policy, practice and research perspectives. At the agency, we facilitate peer learning in a variety of ways. Country policy reviews provide snapshots of member countries' educational policy frameworks. Data collection offers insight into statistics such as enrolment rates. Thematic projects involve policymakers, researchers, school leaders, teachers, parents and learners, looking at topics such as financing policies for inclusive education systems. And finally, through the European Commission's Structural Reform Support Service, we address individual challenges identified by ministries of education relating to policy reforms and implementation. Through these activities, we produce evidence-based policy recommendations to inform and improve inclusive education systems. We also identify goals that schools and educators can work towards. And importantly, we encourage cohesion for a brighter future across Europe, because everyone benefits when we can share our strengths and learn from others.
That gives you a very quick overview of some of the work of the European Agency. So for our webinar today, we are very fortunate to have three speakers, Dr. Kathleen Mortier, Ms. Mieke Miere and Ms. Bodil Hafsås, who are all experts in the field with a rich variety of experience across policy and practice in inclusive and special education, and the important role of collaboration at and between all levels of the education system. Please feel free to add your questions for the speakers into the chat feature, as Maria indicated, as we go along. So I'd now like to introduce our first speaker. This is Dr. Kathleen Mortier. And after the break, we'll have our second speaker, and that will be Ms. Mieke Miere, followed by Ms. Bodil Hafsås. So Dr. Kathleen Mortier, She is a consultant for the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education. Previously, she's worked as a professor in the Department of Special Education at San Francisco State University, as the director of California Deaf-Blind Services, and as a lecturer and researcher at Ghent University, Belgium, and as a teacher in special and inclusive education settings. Kathleen has extensive experience in working for change in inclusive education systems based on her work with families, communities, and schools in several countries, as well as with policymakers in Belgium over the past 25 years. So a very warm welcome, Kathleen, and we're very much looking forward to what you have to tell us. I will hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to my colleagues in the agency for inviting me to speak at this webinar. You can go to the very beginning slide. Thank you. Yeah. And I want to also grant a special welcome to the representatives in the Ministries of Education in Portugal, Spain, and Italy, with whom I had the opportunity to work in this TSI project. I'm impressed with your vision and your passion to move an inclusive education agenda forward in often increasingly difficult circumstances. And I mean both in the realities of our today's schools, as well as our political realities across Europe. I would like to express my appreciation also for the colleagues from DG Reform who are making this work possible, and for delving into the intricacies of the field of education, which may be very different from other projects, because school communities, they mirror the complexities and challenges of the society at large. Last, I would like to thank all of the other participants in this webinar for giving some of your precious time to be here and to be open to listen and learn. But before I get started, I would like to say one thing. I really do not like webinars. It is because they are based on the false assumption that I am the one who knows something and that you need to learn what I know, and that me talking through a PowerPoint presentation in this virtual reality is going to do the trick. I don't think learning works this way. I strongly believe that learning only happens in a dialectical model in which one person shares their experience and insight, which is ever evolving, and the other person gets to respond from their experience and insight. And because of this interaction, then we have created a space to connect and both learn something new. In fact, this is the essence of my talk today, and the main thing I want to relay to you as policymakers, as educators, as families, who spend a lot of time thinking about teaching and learning at home, in initial teacher training, in professional development, and in your classrooms. But let's get started with the first slide now. So definitions of inclusive education have shifted over time, as you all know, and there are still as many interpretations of inclusive education as there are probably people in this webinar today. But it is worth noting in this central question that I put forward here that we are talking about all pupils, regardless of labels or severity of their support need. It is also about learning as well as participating, and that we talk about whole school environments as being inclusive, and that the focus of the question is on supports, and that's what we'll be looking at today. Next. So when we shift towards inclusive education in our countries and thinking about providing supports for all learners in general education environments, that comes with a shift from an expert and deficit-based model to a partnership and supports-based model. So, knowing history is important because it helps us understand how a field has evolved, why certain things are considered important, and why others are still difficult. There is no such thing as a clean-cut shift. but rather it's a slow process with elements of the past slowly transforming into something different, but also including moments of regression into the old thinking. So my slide here is not really accurate because the line in the middle will be much more blurry in reality. So in an expert deficit-based model, there is often still a separate field that is called special for learners with a statement or whatever it's called in your country. While in a partnership supports-based model is embedded in a single and flexible system for all learners with a wide variety of support needs. In a expert and deficit-based model, knowledge and language around are often focused on diagnoses or language around disabilities. While if we're shifting to a support-based model, then the language will be more about competence, what the student can do, and the support needs that we see in the classroom, the support needs of the learner, but also the support needs in the environment. In an expert model, professionals with specialized trainings are considered the experts. While when we start shifting towards more partnership model, every person, also the pupils, can contribute equally to the discussions about supports. In an expert model, knowledge is more seen as static, something that can be passed on from an expert to teams through training and coaching. While in a partnership and supports-based model, there's the thinking is about creating new knowledge repertoires that are needed due to unique circumstances and unique needs that are constantly shifting. In experts models, there's more use of jargon, testing, assessment, and the trainings are often having a disability focus. While when we're shifting to the other model, support needs are seen as ever-changing and need to be continuously adjusted. So the training focus more on strategies that we can use. And then last, in an expert model, families are often seen as receivers of information, and their contributions are often considered biased and unreliable because we think that they're too emotionally attached to be able to contribute. While in a partnership model, it's really essential that families are central to the children's lives, and we see it that way, and we value their contributions to the support-based planning. So within a partnership model, there have been a series of research studies on collaborative support planning, which I would like to talk with you about today. And this happens at the individual and classroom level. Some of these studies I've been involved in, and some of these studies started in the US with Dr. Hunt and her colleagues. So as we know, in most countries, there is a system in place to develop individualized education plans for learners with special needs that outline specific goals. So it could be academic goals, it could be social or communication goals, sensory, physical goals. But that still, if we have a plan like that, that is great, but that still leaves teachers on their own figuring out how will they teach these goals to the students in the context of their daily workings of the classrooms. So that's what support planning is about. So this is especially true for learners whose goals are very different from the rest of the class. So while the success of inclusive education is not only important to think about what we're going to be teaching, but also how are we going to be teaching and how are we going to promote participation so that all learners can be involved. So in some cases, not for all students, we'll have to systematically plan the supports. So the collaborative support planning is a process, as you can see on the slide, that is used by educational team members. No, it's a previous slide. To develop and collaboratively implement plans of support. So it's two types of supports. We're going to be thinking about educational supports, which is, adapted materials or modified instruction, or social and behavior supports, which can be social facilitation by adults or peers or positive behavior support plans and so on. So, so we're thinking about those kinds of supports in a support planning system. So it's not about the goals, it's about how are we going to support the student achieve their goals in the classroom. Okay, next slide, thank you. So I have to apologize to all of the educators in the room for having way too many words on this slide. But I do want to go over some of these key elements of collaborative support planning. The important thing is that, support planning happens in small teams composed of ideally a parent, the teacher, the special education support teacher, and sometimes these small meetings can be led by somebody in the school who's responsible for care. So in Flanders, we call it the care coordinator. Another important element is that these meetings happen regularly and they're short. So it could be monthly, it could be every 6 weeks. Maybe it's 20 minutes to half an hour at a preferred time and location for the people who are going to be involved. Another key element is that these meetings start from what happens daily in the classroom. So we're going to go through classroom activities, and then we're going to keep asking questions about supports. So essential for this to work is that there's brainstorming and consensus around the supports that are needed in these activities to increase the learners' educational and social participation. So again, this is not about figuring out what is this learner going to learn. This is not about goals. It's about how is he going to participate in each of those activities. And then it's important to have an easy to use and dynamic support plan with actionable items. So we don't need a full written out meeting report. We need actions. What are we going to be doing? And then last, there's 2 more points, but it's not just about having the plan, it's about mostly implementing the plan. So it's very important that there's accountability, that we know who's going to do what, and then, then we see what's going to work, and then we can throw out what's not working and put in another action. So we need some kind of accountability system also to know who's going to do what. So enough listening for now. If you can go back to the previous one, Gamza. Yeah. Let's go ahead and make a support plan. So I would like you to take out a piece of paper or open an empty doc on your computer, and you can draw a table. And you're going to draw a table with 2 columns and let's say maybe 10 rows. So on the top of your first column, you will write supports. And then on the top of the second column, you will write person responsible. Okay, are you drawing your support plan? All right, so if we had an interactive session, I would ask you now, what stands out to you about this plan? Because this is really it. And this is something important that I want to, that I want you to see is that this is a very simple plan. We can all do this. It's very well structured. There's individual lines for short actions. And the main thing that I want to convey here is the importance of that there's nothing on it. This is the starting point of support planning. We start with nothing, and then in the conversation the new knowledge is gonna appear. So anyway, if we can move to the next slide, I'll show you. So here's an example of one of the support plans from the studies in the US that was done by my mentor, Dr. Hunt. And what is important, and we called it then unified plans of support. That's not important what we call it, but what's in red is really important. What's important is that in collaborative work is not to come to the meeting with the answers, but to ask the right questions. So here the question is, how is Jacob, or whatever the name of the student is, doing in circle time, in reading, in writing, in math? And then allow space for dialogue between people who stand to gain the most from this interaction. So like the learner themselves, the teacher, the parents, the person who supports them in the classroom. So the question is really what brings the people into the conversation around what supports are needed for this learner in this class context with this teacher at this time. So in other words, it brings the focus to the here and now, which is ever evolving, right? So the here and now could be that it has been raining for weeks on end and there hardly has been recess outside and everybody in the class is a bit restless. Or maybe in the family of the student we're talking about or the learner we're talking about, there's a new baby born. And so there's a lot of change around that. Or maybe the context is that the teacher feels depressed because she just lost her best friend. Or that this group has a negative reputation and the teacher feels anxious about teaching them, even years before they come into the class. So those are the things that we mean by context. So these things are not always expressed, but they are underlying what's possible. And that's why, the supports will look very different from one classroom to the other, even though it's about the same student or the same learner. So the question is not, what do we know about learners with autism and what they need, and how can we bring it into the class and onto this support plan? That is not at the forefront. This is merely in the back of our minds of, let's say, maybe the support person or somebody with that experience. And if there's one takeaway I hope you get from this presentation is that starting from that empty page that you just drew and changing what is on there continuously is crucial when thinking about supports. So now let's look at some examples from support plans from a study that we did in Flanders. Next slide, please. So here's Jacob. And, we did the study with 3 pupils in Belgium. And so this is Jacob in the first grade. So Jacob is a young man now, but you see him in the picture here in the first grade. And the cart of materials that you see in the picture was also something that came out of the support planning meetings. Because he had so many things on his desk and it was always a mess, which made it difficult for him to find things independently. But he also had a teacher who did not like messy desks. So you can see that in the other items on here as well, giving Jacob clear messages about moving teachers' materials or having letters in envelopes to make words. So in other words, the support items that are also a response to a teacher who finds tidiness important. So this is not just about Jacob. So that's what support planning means for unique learners in unique contexts. So we can move on to Olivia's plan. So here's some examples of things that Olivia's team came up with. And what I want to point out in this one is the last one and how it is written. So it says, experiment with pairing Olivia with a buddy who can redirect her to work. So we know from a ton of research in inclusive education that using buddies works. So once you know that, it may seem obvious to suggest it as a support. And I've often been in these situations when I'm coaching teams. However, general education teachers often are not used to involving peers in that role, or they fear that it may be disruptive or take away from that pupil's own learning. So what I've learned through 20 years of coaching inclusion projects is that even if you know for sure that something will work, it can only become a support when a teacher or a parent feels comfortable with trying it out. So that is why it was phrased here in a rather careful way. It is not saying, let's set up a full buddy system. No, it just says, let's experiment with having a peer redirect her in certain things. So I think it's important that's what we mean with making sure that it works for everyone. So now let's move to the next plan. This is Jade. the little girl in the striped shirt who's standing. So at the time of the study, Jade was a 5-year-old who was very creative with her behaviors, let's say, and her interactions with people. So I soon discovered that when I was quietly sitting in the corner of her class doing my research observations, and she took a spoonful of sand out of the sandbox and she poured it over my head. So Jade, at the age of 5, had been expelled already from 2 schools because of her difficult behavior. So, and when we started the study, she spent most of her time on the timeout chair because she was very creative with breaking all of the class rules. So I think we can all relate to the challenge of children like Jade in our classrooms. So in this picture, you see her as the assistant of the teacher, handing out pictures to other children during morning meeting. So the idea of this support came about when the mom was sharing that Jade loves to help setting the table at home. And she says, yeah, and I let her carry the jam over to the table, even though I'm worried that she'll drop it and we'll have jam all over the floor. But she's proud when she can help me set the table. So after hearing that, the teacher just, naturally suggested, oh, maybe I can make her my helper during circle time. So instead of, staying in circle time or morning meeting for 1 minute until she had pulled, the girl's hair next to her, and being, sent to the timeout chair, she was able to stay for a much longer time. And what I also noticed is that the peers, because she was handing out the pictures, the peers had to thank her for the pictures. So the peers started to look differently at her, and as somebody who was participating in the group. So anyway, so these are just some examples. And, again, if we had an interactive session, I would ask you what stands out about all the supports that you're seeing on here. And the thing is that, so I would hope that then you would say, these are simple things. These are ideas. These ideas are not rocket science. Anyone can come up with them. And they are specific to what goes on in the classroom or issues that have occurred that were difficult for the teacher. They're tied into the learner's interests or style. They're positive. They're written as actions. And they have as much to do with the teacher as the learner. So those are some of the things that we learned from building these support plans. And they continuously change because we go to the next meeting and when we see, okay, is this working? If it is, we keep it. If it's not, we just throw it back out. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of supports that we're talking about. So now I would like to talk a little bit. I'm not here to discuss research with you, but I just want to mention, briefly that, with these 3 learners, we use an observation tool to look at student engagement and also at social interactions. And we looked at it before we implemented a support plan and then after it was being implemented. And we noticed, and the visual is just there to make the slide pretty. But what we noticed is that there was a decrease in times that the student was not engaged in what was going on in the class, and there was an increase in social interactions. So that meant reciprocal interactions and also student-initiated interactions, because as we know, it's really hard for some students to initiate an interaction. Then we also, the qualitative data, we interviewed after doing this for a year. We interviewed the teachers, the families, the support persons who were part of developing these support plans. So they felt that the collaborative support planning was efficient because the meetings were short and to the point and focusing on the needs in the classroom. They also noticed that it raised trust. A connection grew through the regular contact that people had, and the system of thinking out loud together and contributing ideas that build on each other from their own knowledge really worked well. and raised their trust in each other. Then they felt the process was creative. The interviewees felt like it was easy to come up with the new ideas and solutions. And it felt like these ideas just flowed naturally out of the stories that were being shared, just like the one I just shared about Jade. Having a plan with action items, just short sentences, felt clear and got everyone on the same page. So it was good to have something written down, but it was very clear and succinct. So, and the plan was adjusted every time the group came together. And then last, the interviewees felt that it was very practical. They stressed the importance that the solutions were their own. They didn't come from some expert, and they were very flexible and easy to implement. Okay. So now you may think, we can go to the next slide. Oh, this sounds so good. Let's try to implement this in our school or in our country, or, let's roll this out. I think it's important to understand that more than anything, collaborative support planning is a way of thinking and can take any form and take many forms. So here again, we shouldn't get tempted to follow a particular format, but focus on the essence and adapt it to our local situations. So the essence is to start from activities throughout the school day, involve families. The creativity and developing new ideas together is essential, and then having regular contact. So as long as you have these elements in some form or formats, you're doing support planning. Also, in secondary schools, as you're probably already thinking, we need different ways to do this because there's way too many teachers. So it would get way too complicated to organize it in meetings. We can use digital platforms to do this thinking. We can have maybe a central person who's connecting with different teachers. We can have notebooks that go back and forth. Again, we need to figure out some way to be thinking about these questions. How is the student doing? How can he be supported? I also want to point out that after the study, we did a rollout in Flanders in Belgium with about first 25 and then another 25 teams. And a lot of learners participated themselves, especially in secondary. And what we learned there is that was really powerful because the learner came up with great ideas, things that the adults would not be thinking of. Plus the fact that the learner felt listened to, especially if it was around behavior, and the ideas were theirs, made that they were way more committed to making it successful. So that was a really important component that you can consider when you're setting this up. And I also want to say that support planning is something that happens informally all the time. So we don't have to make it this new special thing. Anytime two teachers at the coffee machine talk about, oh, how is this student doing in your class? I'm having trouble with this. And they're doing support planning. They're exchanging ideas about how to do something, how to involve a student, how to get them to learn better. It happens between parents and teachers. It happens between learners and teachers, between support persons and teachers. So this is a natural thing, and it can take many shapes and forms. Also very important because you think, oh my goodness, this would take forever to have support plans for everyone in the school that needs it. Not every pupil with special needs needs a written out support plan. The thinking around supports will be important for all the for all the learners, but we don't need written out plans for everyone. And then it's really important when we're thinking about this that the focus is on people who get together in social structures and make them learn with and from each other. That's really at the heart of collaborative support planning. By the time I conducted this study, I had been an inclusion coach in Flanders for 10 years. And often parents would call me when there were issues with their child in general education schools. And I would just, whenever I could, I would join. whatever meeting, and we would do the same thing. We would brainstorm about how we could move things forward. And it was different every time. But when I thought more deeply about what was happening in these meetings that I had been having for years, but also in this study, it resonated with the theory behind communities of practice. So if we can go to that slide. So Mortier in Canada developed, this is a picture of his first book, this concept of communities of practice. Communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic, and who deepen their knowledge and their expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. So I felt that connected very well with what we were doing in those support planning meetings. So in the next slide, you can see that the collaborative support planning meeting aligns well with the main components of communities of practice. The first one is domain. The domain creates the common ground and a sense of common identity. It inspires the members to contribute and participate, and it gives meaning to their actions. So in the collaborative support planning, that's the shared goal of, we want to successfully include this learner, in this unique setting. And we try to make sure the learner is engaged and is learning new things. Then the second component is community. Community is what creates the social fabric of learning. It fosters the interactions based on mutual respect and trust. So this is, what we try to do when we bring people together in a small group. It's team members valuing and building on each other's perspectives and input to figure out how the student is doing and what supports can be put in place. And then the last component of communities of practice is the practice that comes out of it. So it's the specific knowledge that the community develops, this new knowledge, and that they share with each other and they maintain. So in the support planning, the items on the action plan are, the feasible supports that are written on the plan and that then are made accessible to implement. So that's kind of the connection between the two models. And you can move to the next slide. So, communities of practice is considers learning as a process of social participation. So this originated outside of the field of education. They discovered, for instance, in a factory, when the CEO, instead of meeting with, the middle management, when they would talk with the workers who are, bolting in the bolts in the cars, that those meetings would be different and would create new knowledge and about how to optimize their systems. Or Mortier, in his book, he worked with insurance claim officers and how they informally kind of figure out together how to deal with certain problems instead of doing that in their formal meetings. So this is something that originated outside of the meetings, outside of education. And it's not just a different term for another type of meeting. It's important to understand the theory and the components behind it. And I know that it has been used in lots of different ways, which often happens with a new term. But I think for the purposes of support planning, it's very important that we have a fundamentally different interpretation of the role of families and learners. Normally, the families are not part of meetings where we're deciding how to teach. So we really, change this place of families and see how they can contribute. And any family can do this, because it's based on your knowledge of the child. So in communities of practice, we shift away a little bit from seeing knowledge as static, like, knowledge about autism or about bilingualism, to a social learning theory, which is embedded in practice, what's going on in the classroom, community, people who meet and talk, and also how it ties into identity and meaning. Because we're all changing through this process. So teachers who are engaging in these communities of practice meetings, start changing or shifting their idea of who they are as a teacher, and they start seeing themselves also as teachers of students with certain disabilities or certain behavior needs and so on. So the identity and the meaning piece is really important. And then last, creating these new knowledge repertoires like this changes what we call espoused theory about inclusion, which is the discourse and the beliefs you think you have about inclusion. Like, for example, oh, it only works with these learners or in a small classroom, to theories in use about inclusion. So that's a discourse that comes out of your own behavior and experience. So having these experiences for the teachers is going to be important in how they're shifting their ideas around inclusive education as well. So now I have to stop talking a little bit and give you a break. But we're going to listen to one of the parents who was part of the study and she's actually the parent of Jacob. Who's also sharing a little bit what this meant for her and what her experience was with communities of practice and with this support planning meetings. So we'll share, I'll share the video with you right now. And it's in Dutch, but it's subtitled in English.
Zou je jezelf even kunnen voorstellen?
Ja, ik ben Mieke. Ik heb geschiedenis gestudeerd aan de Universiteit van Gent. Ik heb daarna daar ook nog wetenschappelijk onderzoek gedaan gedurende 4 jaar. En toen onze oudste in 1994 geboren werd, ben ik fulltime huisvrouw geworden om een aantal privéredenen. We hebben ondertussen 5 kinderen, tussen de leeftijd van 21 en 9 jaar bijna. En sinds de geboorte van Wout, onze zoon met Down-syndroom, ben ik sterk bezig met Down-syndroom Vlaanderen en met heel veel dingen die met inclusie te maken hebben.
Jullie hebben voor Wout met ondersteuningsplanning gewerkt. Hoe werkt ondersteuningsplanning en hoe pakten jullie dit concreet aan?
We zijn daarmee begonnen toen Wout in het eerste leerjaar zat, in september 2007. En dat was op vraag van jou, omdat Wout toen in jouw onderzoek zat. Hoe hebben we dat aangepakt? Wij kwamen om de 4, 5 weken, dan nagelang wat paste in de agendas, samen met de klasleerkracht, de ondersteuningsleerkracht, zelf. Soms was de zorgcoördinator van de school daarbij en jij was daar ook bij, maar je had een observerende rol, jij was niet actief toen. Hoe pakten we dat aan? Het ging iedere keer over de betrokkenheid van Wout aan het klasgebeuren, hoe konden we dat verhogen? Dus voor taal, Wout was afgeleid bijvoorbeeld door de prentjes in zijn leesboek. Dan maakten we een kaartje, we dekten dat af en op die manier was zijn betrokkenheid een stuk hoger. We deden dat voor rekenen, we deden dat voor neuro, we deden dat voor godsdienst. Maar we deden dat ook niet alleen voor de leervakken, en dat was het sterke van dat plan. Het ging ook over het sociaal gebeuren van Wout, hoe konden we hem daarbij betrekken. Bijvoorbeeld zijn hand leren opsteken in een klasgesprek. Het ging ook over de speelplaats, het ging ook over vaardigheden thuis. Op die manier was Wout eigenlijk helemaal gecoverd door de ondersteuningsplan. Dus het was geen doelenplan. Er werd niet gezegd wat Wout zou moeten kunnen tegen het einde van het eerste leerjaar of tweede leerjaar of derde leerjaar. Nee, hoe kunnen we zorgen dat dat doel kan bereikt worden? Daar ging het over.
Ja, wat was de meerwaarde voor Wout? Het feit dat je zo'n ondersteuningsplan had en zo'n actieplan voor de volwassenen eigenlijk.
Ik denk, de betrokkenheid van Wout, maar daar was hij zichzelf niet van bewust uiteraard, maar daar zorgden wij dan wel voor. Maar ik denk dat Wout ook wel voelde op die manier dat er een heel sterke kring rond hem stond. Als er op school iets gebeurde, werd er thuis wel eventjes over gesproken, zowel in het goede als het slechte. Maar ook thuis kreeg een plaats op school. Er werd rekening gehouden met wat er thuis was gebeurd, waardoor dat Wout die dag misschien een beetje minder functioneerde. Die wisselwerking, die vertrouwdheid van thuis met school en school met thuis, dat is een van de sterke punten ook van dat ondersteuningsplan. Dat allemaal een plekje krijgt en dat er op die manier met dat kind gewerkt wordt. Er wordt niet gezegd, het is een met Down, dus hij is koppig, want ze zijn allemaal zo. Nee, thuis loopt het even moeilijk of hij is zwaar verkouden of er is thuis iets gebeurd met een broer of zus, dat heeft repercussies op school, dat kreeg daar een plaats.
Ja, dus je komt kort op de bal spelen.
Zeer kort op de bal.
Ja. En voor jullie als ouders, hoe ervaren jullie die manier van werken?
Voor mij was dat zo belangrijk en ik draag daar nog de gevolgen van dat mijn kennis, mijn wijsheid over woord, dat die daar echt een plek kreeg. Want als je ouder wordt van een kind met een beperking, gaan er allemaal professionelen gaan rechtstaan die komen zeggen hoe je het moet doen. Een logopedist, een kinesist, een thuisbegeleidster. Je krijgt op de duur het gevoel als ouder dat je niks meer weet, want er komen allemaal gestudeerde mensen in huis die je komen zeggen wat je moet doen. Dan denk je, ja oké, hier is mijn rol gedaan, ik mag dat kind alleen nog eten geven, volgens de regels van de logopedist. En ik mag hem laten rechtstaan, volgens de regels van de kinesist. En ik had soms het gevoel, en waar ben ik als moeder? Het is mijn vierde kind, ik weet wel iets over opvoeden. En door dat ondersteuningsoverleg kreeg ik mijn rol als moeder die ook wel iets weet, kreeg ik die volledig terug. En ik kan dat eigenlijk nu al doortrekken tot vandaag, nu we in het tweede middelbaar zit. Daar wordt nu wel rekening gehouden met mijn kennis over woord en daarin ben ik mogen groeien. Dat is een leerschool voor me geweest als we dat oefenen in de lagere school.
En was dat evident om als moeder die plaats van iemand die mee problemen of uitdagingen op school kon aanpakken?
Dat was niet evident. Ik heb daar de toelating moeten voor krijgen. Niemand heeft mij gezegd, Mieke, vanaf nu mag je dat doen. Maar door dat concept op school te gaan implementeren, kreeg ik impliciet een toelating om iets te mogen doen. En ik ben er langzaamaan in gegroeid. En ook bij de overgang naar de secundaire school heb ik mij een beetje op de achtergrond gehouden. Ook gewoon daar niet komen zeggen, voilà, en ik ben de moeder en ik wil dat zo en zo. En het zal zo moeten gebeuren. Nee, ik heb mijn rol langzaamaan opgenomen en weet dat ik een evenwaardig lid ben van dat team.
Moet je volgens jou een mondige ouder zijn om dit te kunnen doen?
Nee, absoluut niet. Want als ouder voel je kind aan, je ziet je kind opstaan, je ziet je kind in het weekend, je ziet je kind 's avonds, je ziet je kind in bad, je ziet je kind op alle mogelijke momenten. En daar zit genoeg materiaal in om te gaan gebruiken op school, om dingen te gaan vertellen. Als je ziet dat je kind thuis, als het in het gezin druk wordt, in elk gezin wordt het wel eens druk, of dat nu een mondig gezin is of niet. En je ziet dat je kind als overlevingsstrategie met zijn rug in een hoekje gaat kruipen, zodat hij letterlijk afgesloten is van alles. Dat is een tip die je aan school kan meegeven. Daarvoor moet je niet een mondige moeder of vader zijn. Dat is iets wat gebeurt in je gezin. Je moet wel als team ouders uitnodigen om hen te zeggen, ook elke bijdrage is een nuttige bijdrage, is een waardevolle bijdrage. Ik ben een denkmama, een praatmama, geen doemama. Ik heb 2 linkerhanden. Maar als je een doemama of doepapa bent, ja, gebruik die know-how van die ouders om aan de slag te gaan.
Dus elke ouder die zijn kind kent, kan bijdragen omdat over die praktische dingen gaat.
En leer het ouders om dat te mogen en te kunnen doen.
Ja. Maar het is belangrijk inderdaad om uitgenodigd te worden om die dingen te delen.
Ja, want ik denk dat voor leerkrachten nog altijd niet evident is om de wijsheid en de kennis van een ouder mee te pakken in een leerproces. Als je het voorzichtig aanbrengt, gebeurt dat steeds meer. Dankjewel, ik zal er rekening mee houden. Leerkrachten zijn zo niet opgeleid. Ik alleen in mijn klas, ik zal het wel doen.
Oké. Kun je misschien een aantal voorbeelden geven van dingen waarin dat je als ouder het verschil hebt kunnen maken in het gesprek of in de zoektocht naar ondersteuningsitems?
Ja, zeker. Bijvoorbeeld in het 3e leerjaar kregen de kinderen les over de euro. En dan werd er gezegd door de leerkrachten, ja kijk, als je dan als niet mee kan met rekenen, als er geen alternatief is in de rekenles, we zullen een euro-oefeningen geven, want hij heeft dat later nodig en anders zullen de mensen hem bedriegen. En ja, je weet wel, die zelfredzaamheid van het buitengewoon onderwijs voor kinderen met verstandelijke beperking. En dan heb ik het volgende gezegd, omdat ik het verhaal ken van een jongen met Down-syndroom die tot het einde van zijn 6e leerjaar achtervolgd is door die euro's. En thuis noemden ze die euro's de neuro's, gewoon om af te reageren. Toen heb ik dus gezegd aan de leerkrachten van kijk, wie van jullie weet er op zondagochtend als hij slaapdronken naar de bakker gaat om broodjes te kopen voor de zondagochtendontbijt en de bakker zegt het is €17,85 en je geeft een briefje van 20, hoeveel je moet weerkrijgen en wie telt in een volle bakkerij ook de centen na. Niemand deed dat. Dus Wout zou het wel moeten kunnen. Wout zou vlot met euro's moeten kunnen werken. Maar zij doen het zelf niet. Hetzelfde op het einde van een rit door een supermarkt. Wie weet er voor hoeveel er in de kar ligt? Niemand weet dat. Iedereen betaalt met de kaart, maar Wout zou het wel moeten kunnen. En mensen zagen dat in, volgden die logica. En Wout heeft nooit meer euro-oefeningen moeten doen dan andere kinderen. Hij kreeg ook het recht om gewoon euro-oefeningen te maken, net als de rest. Iets anders is dat we vaak ook frustraties van leerkrachten hebben kunnen opvangen binnen dat team. Bijvoorbeeld in het 5e leerjaar had Wout een juf die heel strikt is, heel sterk wil dat de kinderen meteen aan de slag gaan 's ochtends in de klas. Wout heeft tijd nodig om op zijn gemak te komen, om zich aan te passen aan het klasgebeuren. En ja, hoe meer Wout tijd nodig had, hoe meer de juf eiste dat hij aan zijn taakje begon, hoe minder Wout wou beginnen. We hebben daar ook heel open kunnen over praten, want het draait allemaal rond communicatie hoor, in dat ondersteuningsoverleg. En dan hebben we een systeem bedacht dat er heel eenvoudige taakjes op Wout zijn lessenaar lagen. Er lag ook een duidelijke boodschap bij, dat als er geen ondersteuning was, dat Wout die taak moest maken. Heel simpel. Het probleem was opgelost. En dat is net het leuke. Je kan in vertrouwen met elkaar in gesprek gaan. Er is boosheid geweest in die overlegmomenten. Er is verdriet geweest. Er is vooral heel veel vreugde en plezier geweest. Heel veel gelachen op die moment. Maar vooral het woord vertrouwen en open communicatie. En als dat lukt, dan kan je heel veel bereiken.
Ja, en het is inderdaad ook niet alleen de noden van Wout op zo'n momenten, op klasmomenten, maar ook wat zijn verwachtingen van de juf en hoe wil zij haar. Dus die context wordt eigenlijk meegenomen en in functie van die dingen wordt er een oplossing.
Ja, tuurlijk, want als juf zich dan goed voelt met Wout, dan voelt Wout zich ook goed. En een keer als dat probleem opgelost was in het 2e leerjaar, zag je die twee samen mooi evolueren.
Dus het is ook even goed belangrijk, wat is er belangrijk voor de juf?
Ja.
En hoe wil zij daar dingen organiseren?
Het is een win-win situatie. Nu in het begin denken leerkrachten, help, weer al eens samen zitten. Naast het doelenplan moeten we nu ook nog over een ondersteuningsplan gaan denken. Maar veel leerkrachten zijn achteraf, het is eigenlijk winnen dat we doen, door toch om de 4-5 weken een klein uurtje samen te zetten. En in het begin is dat een beetje stroef, is dat een beetje van, ja, wat gaan we nu weer moeten doen? Maar dan zien leerkrachten dat de afspraken die we maken om Wout te betrekken bij het klasgroep, dat wel werkt. Dat wij de dingen maken die afgesproken zijn, dat de leerkracht doet wat afgesproken is. Dat ze na een maand kan zeggen, ja, dat heeft echt wel gewerkt. Er waren ook dingen die niet werkten. Die zweerden er gewoon weer van. Zo eerlijk moet je zijn.
Dus het was echt ondersteunend ook naar die klaswerking van die leerkracht. Ja,
zeker.
En ik begrijp ook dat de momenten waren ook bewust kort gehouden. Dus het was geen lange vergadering.
Nee, en ook op het moment dat het past. Soms was dat na de school. Soms was het over de middag. Al naar gelang van wat paste voor de leerkracht. De ene leerkracht zei, ik wil het alleen over taal hebben, want daar zit nu een knoop. Andere leerkrachten wilden het hele plan doorlopen. Je moet je aanpassen aan de leerkracht.
Nu, je hoort vaak van leerkrachten dat ze de expertise niet in huis hebben om een kind met een beperking in de klas te integreren. Had je het gevoel dat de leerkrachten weinig ideeën of oplossingen hadden? Of dat dingen waren die vreemd waren voor hen?
In het begin moet je ze overtuigen om te zeggen dat ze wel heel veel kunnen. Want leerkrachten denken altijd dat ze niets kunnen, maar dat is niet
Of dat het speciaal
Of dat het heel speciaal is dat ons kinderen van
È
Mars
speciaal para trabalhar, parece que os miúdos
vienen de Marte, por ejemplo.
E hanno bisogno di un qualche trattamento specifico, ma io devo dire...
Je hebt expertise opgedaan, dat zit in je rugzak, haal dat er ook uit voor Wout en gebruik dat. En waar leerkrachten ook heel opgelucht over zijn, is als je zegt, je mag een fout maken. Je mag herbeginnen. Wij zijn ook als ouders vaak fout. Dan herbeginnen we. Dit is onze weg, maar als dat niet lukt, keren we terug. En doen we een nieuwe poging. En dat is dan, door de vertrouwdheid van dat ondersteuningsoverleg, mag je en kan je fouten maken. En herbeginnen. Niemand neemt het je kwalijk, want iedereen gaat ervan uit, we doen ons best.
Ja, Wout zit nu in het middelbaar en heeft nu verschillende leerkrachten. Hebben jullie deze manier van werken of aspecten daaruit kunnen doortrekken naar de middelbare school? Of hoe zijn jullie nu met aanpassingen bezig?
Het ondersteuningsoverleg op zich doen we niet meer, omdat we met zodanig veel mensen zijn. En ook een teamoverleg is al heel moeilijk. Ik heb zelfs het gevoel dat de leerkrachten nu denken, oh ja, dat loopt en ze trekken een plan. Want ze zitten tijdens teamoverleg onderling te babbelen. Ja, ze hebben er alle vertrouwen in, waar ze in het begin ook heel bang waren. Maar de expertise die we opgedaan hebben, de ondersteuningsleerkracht en ikzelf in de lagere school, die gebruiken we nu wel. En ik ga steeds meer dingen opnemen op school, zonder te zeggen, ik ben het, ik weet het, ik kan het, ik hou mij wel op. Ik blijf op mijn plaats staan als ouder. Maar leerkrachten ontdekken stilletjes aan dat de suggesties die ik doe, de voorbereidingen die ik doe, dat die toch wel waardevol zijn, dat die zinvol zijn.
Dus eigenlijk heb je door de manier van werken, ben je blijven in communicatie gaan met de school, maar dan via een ander medium dan het overlegmoment.
Ja, en ook
suggesties te doen rond aanpassingen of hoe dat we dingen kunnen aanpakken.
En ik durf het ook doen. Ik zit niet te denken, zou ik dat wel doen? Mag ik dat wel doen? Wat gaat die meneer denken? Nee, ik doe het. En dan zien we wel wat de reactie is. Maar ik vind dat ik redenen heb, of dat ik geleerd heb, dat mijn redenen ook valabele redenen zijn om een suggestie tot aanpassing te doen.
Ja. En nog tenslotte, welk advies heb je voor scholen en ouders die zouden willen starten met zo'n manier van werken?
Doe het gewoon. Gooi je, zwem. En zorg dat er een paar radars aan de kant staan. Maar doe het gewoon omdat de communicatie, de open communicatie, de eerlijke communicatie en de band van vertrouwen die je creëert op die manier, is zo belangrijk voor iedereen. Leerkrachten groeien van, ik kan dat. Kinderen zijn betrokken. Een betrokken kind stimuleert de juf. Een gestimuleerde juf stimuleert een leerling. Het is een wissel van onvoorstelbaar werk. Je kan het alleen niet altijd objectiveren, maar je ziet het gewoon.
Oké, dankjewel.
Okay. So this was Mieke's story. And, this leads us to talk a little bit about, we can go to the next slide, about the importance of the parent perspective. And, there's a whole bunch of research on family school partnerships that would be a whole nother separate presentation. But I just want to point out the work of Anne and Rudd Turnbull, their parents also of a young man with disabilities, but they have done a ton of research with all kinds of families from different backgrounds. And through all their work, they found that these 7 main principles for effective family school partnerships, that, with the trust in the middle. And, if you look at what these are, you can see, a lot of, the things that Mieke was sharing as her story as a parent are also part of this visual. So, but I won't go much deeper into that for now. So we can move to the next slide. So, kind of, since we're a lot of policymakers, we're educators who want to create change, I do want to, stop a little bit and talk about, the importance of collaboration and its impact on systems change. So, if we're looking at the collaborative support planning or the community of practice processes, I think what we're learning here is the importance of constructing knowledge as a group for specific children and unique contexts and environments. So that's one main lesson. Then another thing, it's really important, the importance of linking into teachers' biographies. Who is this teacher? What does this teacher need? So every year it'll be different. And of course, the child is changing as well. So everything is constantly changing, but who this teacher is very important. And then also we learned through this process the importance of tapping into the parents and the students' knowledge. We often forget to do that enough. If we really have, and we get into these situations of resistance and we feel like we can't have that conversation. But if we really ask them the question and they feel like there's a chance to contribute, then a whole different kind of dynamic starts working. So if we think about this in terms of systems change, traditionally in education, changes in education are experienced as top-down or large-scale or pushed onto teachers and schools. You know, teachers think, oh, yeah, here comes another change. And I've seen many, you know, if they've been in the field for a while. So they tend not to be successful when they don't take into account the experience of the people involved. And that's what the research says. So like the teachers. So there are bigger chances of success of systems change when innovation is linked to meaning making of the individual teacher and to their professional identities. So, and that's what we saw as part of these communities of practice. Through going through this, you know, in a small group, teachers are starting to change their ideas of their professional identity. So when we're looking at Vandenberg's research, for example, it showed that positive change processes take into account insecurities among teachers. So it also, it's successful when the complexity of the innovation is reduced. So if we do a whole meeting and talk about everything around inclusion and what it means and kind of in broad terms, then, you know, it can be overwhelming and it could be something you don't want to do. But when it's reduced to an individual child in a classroom with a particular support system and going a process together, it reduces that complexity and it creates opening. And then also when there's attention given to the development of a supporting vision. So involving teachers in processes like support planning or communities of practice can enhance such a change when it's directly linked to their day-to-day experiences with students who challenge them. And that could be any student, right? So this is, you know, this is how this collaborative work is important as kind of a motor for systems change towards inclusive education as well. Next slide. Yeah. And this is my last slide, actually. So thank you so much for listening. Gracias, obrigado, grazie. You know, building inclusive schools and inclusive societies is a slow process that needs to find a way to grow from the ground up. And through collaborative working, through a lot of talking and collaborative thinking. And that is why I want to end with this quote from Paulo Coelho, and I'll try to read it in Spanish to you. Hasta los árboles más altos proceden de semillas tan pequeñas como estas. Recuérdalo y no te precipites. So don't rush it. This takes time. We need time to grow these inclusive processes, and there's a lot of people involved. So I thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions and comments in the chat, or you can also, of course, email me. And hopefully in the future, we can meet in person and we can start having that next conversation. What does this content mean for you in your classroom, in your system, and what could you start doing with it? So that would be an interesting next conversation to have. Thank you. Thanks.
Kathleen, thank you very much indeed for that very interesting and informative and indeed very personal, I think, presentation, drawing on your experience and the experience of people that you've worked with. There's so much in there that's so interesting. I hope that you as the participants have some questions for Kathleen. There are many issues in there, and perhaps those of you who are teachers and are primary school teachers or elementary age or older teachers of children who are slightly older or teenagers. We might think about some transitions. We might think about teacher resistance, I think. A lot of the information is focused around primary schools, I feel, where teachers have more interaction with parents. It comes naturally. They see, you know, you pop in and out as a parent, you meet your child's teacher at the school gate. But when children go into the secondary sector, when they're 12 or 11, 12, whatever age they transfer, there are many teachers all of a sudden and a very full timetable. And I wonder if anybody has any questions or any of these issues that have raised. Nothing at the moment. I might ask you a question, Kathleen, if that's all right. It's absolutely fascinating what you're saying and what the person that you were talking to is saying about teachers don't have all the knowledge, and indeed parents don't have all the knowledge, but teachers and parents, teachers and family members need each other to understand what works for a child, what's important, and how to manage. And I'm interested if you have any information about how we can develop that. As you say, teachers are all different. They all have their own context, they have their own characteristics, their own ways of working and being. Is this something we can bring into training, or can we find time within a whole school week to work on teacher collaboration and this kind of thing? What's your experience around that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what was important, in these studies, or in what we saw in a lot of schools then after that in Flanders, is that there's that it's not just stays at the informal level, that something is being put in place, even though it's small and but it's organized, it's on the calendar, and even though there's no huge issues, it was always interesting to talk to each other. So we don't have to wait until something explodes to start having conversations, because then often we've missed a lot of opportunities. So I think, from a school organizational perspective, set up the time and create the space for teachers to participate. Because here teachers did it before, in the middle of or after school, and they were fine because they felt like they gained a lot from it. But having it into the system and not just wait until something happens. So that's often, we need time to collaborate, we need time to talk, and that can be in different shapes and forms. And then I think in secondary, it could be teachers connecting, or there could be digital systems where we're having back and forth around these same questions. But organizing meetings is not going to be helpful there.
No. Thank you. And I had another question that was raised by Vort's mother. I thought she said a lot that was very interesting. But one particular thing, she said the plan was not based on learning targets. And I thought that was really interesting, because that's where the problems I can see come. Whereas if you think, in her case, her son took a little bit of time to settle in the morning, let's just deal with that. Or deal with, rather than saying he's got to have done this by the end of this week in terms of learning. Can you comment on how teachers can kind of make the balance between, if it's behavior or it's well-being in the classroom, working in this way, in these parental and school collaborations with the child as well. Does that have a knock-on effect on learning? Is that the outcome?
I think the outcome, so it's important to always make the distinction between, the goals, which is, we all have these meetings around what's going to be learned, or for, students who have less significant disabilities, we have the general curriculum. So there's the what question, but then there's the how question. And the focus of these meetings is on how we're going to make it work. So we don't make, if he has difficulty getting going in the morning, we don't make that into an educational or a social goal. We just think about, these are actually the support plans, are the goals for the adults. How are we going to, what are we going to do so that he can take his time and get going? So maybe there's extra work, or maybe a peer will sit with him. So it's more about what we're going to be doing, instead of adding more goals and then evaluating those goals. It's more about how we're going to be doing things, and how are we going to do it in a way that works for both the student and for the teacher.
Yeah. And thank you. That's very interesting. And it's very much, as you say, from the bottom up. And of course, we're always saying what works for one child is going to work for a lot of children in the class. There'll be other people who are benefiting, and I can see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was very interested in thinking about I used to be a secondary school teacher, and I've met a lot of resistance from teachers into being someone different as a teacher. So where they have, for example, subject knowledge in the secondary school. So we're talking about teaching children up to the age of 18 or so, on subject-based topics, as it were. And they have resistance to this type of engagement. Have you come across ways of kind of working around that with secondary school teachers who don't, as far as I can see, have a great deal of time to work with support teachers, or they see parents or families occasionally once a term, sometimes in a system? So is there a link person? How might that work?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I really recognize that idea of these content teachers who, who are just focused on that. And so then, of course, the student ends up in their class, or there's stuff that's not working with particular learners. And so there, I think the person who comes in as a support person can really make a difference in, for instance, pointing things out. Wow, it was great that you asked him this question, because it really made him think about, or it really helped him engage. Or I loved how you, so kind of acknowledging the positive things that are happening can really kind of get their, or broaden their view of what they're doing and what it and the implications for this student. So I think it's more kind of those in-between moments. There's been a lot of the learners that I worked with had a notebook that's going back and forth, or some feedback or another that kind of confirms the things that are working, or just raises questions about oh, this was confusing, but look, and that's what Wout's mom often did. She would develop some adaptations. He would bring them to school, and then maybe it was dividing the activity into 5 steps and having a visual with it. And so then the teacher would say, oh yeah, this works. And then sometimes, as you say, would start using it with other learners as well in the classroom. So it's less of a structured activity, but it is getting to have these teachers look at what they're doing in a different way, and the impact it has on particular students. So there's different kind of entry points to point that out, and to create those kind of small conversations. Or sometimes teachers, as I said, in the coffee room will share something, and often the questions only come when there's issues, and when it's really difficult. So then how in a school can we create this kind of atmosphere of sharing the difficulty and brainstorming with others? And that can take many shapes and forms.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. I'd like to encourage any of our participants, if you have a question for Kathleen, please do put it in the chat. In sort of any time now, really. Kathleen, I just wanted to ask you one other question, if I may, just in case anybody would like to put something up. You were talking about how teachers need to see themselves in a different way, and I think that's really important. And of course, that is all bound up with being an inclusive teacher. So my question is around teacher education, really. How can we change the sort of attitudes and approaches of teachers who often feel, I think, coming out of teacher education and beginning to embark on their first job, that they've got to get it all right. They've got to know it all. And they're keeping themselves sort of, they're not looking for help because they don't think they should be looking for help, and that kind of thing. How might we, through training and support and mentorship, change those types of things that are coming through our training, perhaps giving the wrong messages to young teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, again, a great question, because we all go into the field thinking that having a particular image of our professional identity, and we think it's this particular set of things, and we have to do this perfectly. And this is how we're training, because you get evaluated, and you have your work experience, and somebody comes and observes you, and it's all very scary. While actually we need to teach teachers that this constant reflection and searching for answers is kind of the main part of the job, and because you're never in the same situation twice.
Yeah.
And teaching is not just about what you do, it's about what happens in this whole classroom. It's what happens among the learners. It's what you can get in motion. And it's about a lot of trial and error and communicating. But because and that's true in a lot of fields, but with the teaching profession, you're often in a room by yourself. So it may feel like you have to know it all. So this kind of not knowing, starting from the empty page, collaborating and thinking together, if you can set that up as a culture in your school, as a principal, or within teacher training, have this as one of the things you're teaching. This learning teaching is not about knowing, it's about developing and changing things all the time. So it's really having this different view of how learning happens. Also happen, like lift that to the teacher training level, like what we're saying about what we need to do with the students, with the learners, also do it at the training level. Just create that kind of experience of maybe with other people in the training to reflect on things together. There's lots of good experiences with people who discuss videos of themselves teaching and together, and then so showing yourself in a vulnerable way and in a learning way is going to be important. But having the conversations and knowing that learning happens when you speak with somebody else, and you don't all have to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Very wise. I've perhaps been misleading people by saying, please put your questions in the chat. Actually, could you please put them in the Q&A feature that is in Zoom? And please put them in your own language. And if necessary, we will translate them into English. I have somebody who's put a comment. Well, there's a question around, do you have experience about plans for migrant students? That's one. And another one is, someone has said the main issue in this person's view is to develop a trust area for effective cooperation with families in order to avoid bias and conflicts. And we can see how that would be true. Another problem this person raises is there could be teacher timing schedule, which we talked about. How might we put that into the teacher's day or week, to include a monthly meeting with families, considering that we have classes with 2 to 3 students with special needs in every class and many planned meetings and activities. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
Sure. I think, there's the practical issues for sure. So that's why I also mentioned in the presentation, you can't do this for every pupil in your classroom. So you have to kind of see in what shape or form it has to take. Maybe for some students a month, for some learners, I keep saying that because I have this American thing. For some learners, it's a monthly thing, but for others, it could be less regular. The contact could be more informal, but, just maybe 10 minutes when the mom is going to pick up the child and you have the conversation. And I think the trust issue that was raised by somebody is crucial. And it's not that what I've learned through these processes, and there's many more than just in this study, is that it happens by doing. So once somebody gets invited and once they get over the barrier of stepping into this room and feeling like they can share something, something's going to happen through doing it and through the experience. Some of my research I did in the US was with Latinx families, because there's a lot of Spanish-speaking families there, and I interviewed the families, and then we also, so when I interviewed the families, they often felt like it was not their place to tell teachers what to do. They would look at the professionals in a different way, and did not feel comfortable. So they really have to be invited, not just once, but multiple times.
Yeah.
And, so or sometimes coming into the class and meeting other parents. So you need to really create a lot of opportunities and not just the one time that everybody else is going to be there. So so that was one of the things that came out of there. And then what was also important there was that what I discovered is that there's cultural, what I called cultural brokers. There are people in their own communities who may have more experience because they have an older child, or because they're more comfortable, or they, who can, or who have gone through a process already of special education and understand all the steps involved. So they can become instrumental to involving other parents and creating that trust and say, no, you go, you come with me, or have you seen this meeting? So, and cultural brokers can be other parents, but I also noticed in the research that it can be, for instance, a Spanish-speaking teacher in the school who helps them with translating. So it's a lot of kind of lowering the bar and a lot of inviting and sticking with it and invite them again, and then creating an environment where they can be comfortable and where they can speak their language, where there's interpretation. So again, that creates more organization and logistical issues. But I think the invitation needs to be repeated, needs to be authentic, and not, oh, look, they didn't show up for parent-teacher night, they're not interested. Because that's often, but parents don't always feel like they have a place there, or they don't feel comfortable because they're embarrassed because of the language barriers. So I think having somebody come with them to the meeting, knowing that they can bring somebody who can help understand what's going on. So just figuring out ways to lower that entry bar into the school, and then again, just like with the other families, just by having the regular contact, it can really just start building that trust. But it takes time, just like with any trusting relationship, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen. I mean, thank you so much for your presentation, and then for answering these questions and these additional points in such great deep detail. It's really been absolutely fascinating, and thank you for all the work you've done on this over the years and shared with us, and shown us how to build these real, genuine collaborations where everybody's voice is heard and what you have to say, whoever you are, is taken into the mix and count. So thank you so much. I think we will take a break now, if that's all right with everybody, for 15 minutes, and we will see you all in 15 minutes for our next speaker. So thank you to you all, and thank you, Kathleen. So welcome back, everyone, to the second part of our webinar this afternoon, after our short break. I just want to pick up very briefly before I introduce our next speaker on a question or a point that came in just as we were finishing the previous session around the work that Kathleen presented to us. The question was around that the observation is that, of course, we're not just working in countries with children with disabilities, but the diversity of learners' needs in the classroom is now very great. And of course, many countries have people who don't speak the language, who are migrants, children who come from refugee backgrounds, children with a whole range of difficulties. And of course, the approach that Kathleen is talking about, it works for any learner at all, because it's very individually based. It's not around what the label is or what the particular difficulty is in terms of a disability that's labeled or category, but more thinking, what does this child need? How can we help this child in a small way? And this is when Kathleen was saying it's based on this child in this situation at the moment with this teacher. So I think we need to think that this is an approach that can work for all learners, not just some learners. And teachers look at children and learners as individuals within the context. So I hope that answers that question that came in from somebody. Thank you very much for the question. So now we're in part two. Thank you. And we'll have two presentations this afternoon. And this will be followed by an opportunity for you to put your questions to both speakers after our third speaker has spoken. And please add these to the question and answer feature as you have done before. So now I would very much like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Mieke Miere. Ms. Miere has a professional background across many aspects of special and inclusive education in Belgium, Flanders, having supported and worked with many learners as a teacher, as a coordinator of a support network for learners with intellectual disabilities, and in collaboration with other professionals. In her position as a pedagogical advisor of Catholic Education Flanders, she brought her wide experience of special and inclusive education to the policy level. She currently works closely as a trainer and key support for learner centres for elementary schools and for those working with learners with a range of additional needs. So, Mieke, a very warm welcome, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say and tell us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone here. I will try to share my presentation. I have two screens, so this will be easy, I hope. No, it's not that one. Here. So, and now. You can see the presentation, and I have just one.
Mieke, we're in presentation mode. If you're happy with that, fine.
I think yes. I just have my other screen a little bit difficulties. I just will take another screen. I lost my notes, so just a little moment, please.
Please, don't rush. We have plenty of time.
I will stop sharing and now try to get my other screen back. And if it's not possible, I will ask Kathleen to share the presentation.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, do you have the presentation, Kathleen?
Yes, I do. I'll share it.
Yes, because I can't look my notes. I don't know why, but yeah, it's 60 plus. I think.
It's all these technical issues. We're all having the same problems, I think, Mieke. Thank you very much.
Okay. And now I look for Kathleen. So I will build this one like that. And where is Kathleen now? Okay. Yes. So education in Belgium is organized at the level of the federal states. And today I will discuss the legislation and collaborative structures that support inclusive schools in the Flemish part of the country. Yeah, historically, Flanders is known for its extensive segregated system of special education schools and institutions. It was not until in 2014 that a first piece of legislation was approved that granted the right for all learners to register in a general education school. Before 2014, we did have a legal framework for the integration for learners with physical and sensory impairments, but inclusion for pupils with intellectual disabilities was project-based and often depending on the goodwill of schools and even of individual teachers. And then in 2017, Flanders started setting up support networks with personnel from special education schools. A part of this personnel was made available to support pupils and teachers in general education using their disability-related expertise. And then a year later, in 2018, there was a decree. The decree of pupil support was approved then. And that decree required all schools to implement a tiered system of support. And this support was based on the question of how can we be a good school for all learners and provide support that can match the different levels of need. This placed the responsibility on all schools to organize support instead of uniquely relying on external help from experts. Then last, in 2023, there was a decree learning support that was approved. This decree is based on the M decree of 2014. However, the main difference is that now learning support centers are set up as independent entities with their own structure, their own funding, and their own professional development. So these persons are not longer teachers of the schools for children with special needs. The professional development in these centers is organized as a weekly opportunity to exchange experiences, questions, and insights. So there is an expertise that grows in these centers. The exchange of experiences is based on concrete cases or issues that surfaced. And then in the dialogue, the learnings are tied back to evidence-informed knowledge. This has become a space of real learning. In the dialogue about the different levels of education, we have the pupil level, the classroom level, and the school level. And there are also opportunities to exchange with experts from special education. So there is a relation still. And then the next slide. Yeah. Now we were talking about the organization of collaborative work and thinking. This is an example of the way a learning support center is organized. It's looking a bit difficult, but it isn't. This center is one of 5 in the region East Flanders. I will talk about East Flanders because each region in Flanders has a number of these centers. We have East Flanders, we have West Flanders, we have Antwerp, the region of Antwerp, the region of Brussels, and the region of Limburg. And each center is organized slightly different according to the needs in the region, the vision of the leaders, or the type of specialization of the employees. So each employee has his own specialization sometimes. For example, in some centers, there are 2 learning support persons per school. but other schools could have 4 or 5. There are schools that don't want too many people interfering with the daily management of their school. So this depends on what the school wants. Some will a person who is generalist, Kathleen, who can manage different types of learning. The learning support persons focus on particular issues. This depends on their own background and the needs they encounter. And then once a week, these learning support persons can connect with the coaches. You see also the place of the coaches. And the coaches have disability-specific specializations. And once a week, the learning support persons can connect with them during the professional development time. But the coaches can also directly support teachers and pupils in schools or provide training in schools about a specific disability. In addition, there are also coordinators who are responsible for low incidence disabilities. And they provide professionalization and support across the whole region, not only for one center, but for more different centers. Next slide. Now I will show you an infographic, maybe also a bit complicated, but I will talk about it, and so you can understand it. This infographic represents the cyclical nature of the work of the learning support centers. I apologize for the Dutch in the infographic, but I will highlight some main points. The inner part in orange reflects the individual learning level. The learning support person collaborates with the parents and the school to construct a learner image. Who is this child? Which are the needs? And so on. Out of this image, the individualized goals are determined. The binoculars, you see the binoculars in the middle, represent the future perspective and the dreams of the learner and their family. Because we find it very important that also the student or the parents can bring in the dreams of the child and their own dreams. We have the dreams and we have what is possible, really possible, but we try to realize the dreams. Okay, so the binoculars represent the dreams and the future perspective. So once the individualized goals are clear, they reflect together on how these goals will be worked on. Consequently, the individual pupil can learn and participate in all aspects of the school environment. This is continuously evaluated and adjusted. That's why the circles are there. The point at which the circles intersect on the bridge in the middle is where the learning support person has to think about how he or she will support the teacher. Because supporting the teacher is all about figuring out how the learner will learn and participate in the class activities while working on their individualist goals. These are the questions of support planning that Kathleen was talking about in her presentation. You can see this in the image in the right circle. You see the persons there can be ideally a parent, a teacher, and a support person. So what Kathleen was talking about, who figure out together how to best support the child or the young person. Then you see also a dark green circle. The dark green circle represents what happens at the classroom level, which, as we know, has its unique dynamics, challenges, and strengths. The learner support person analyzes the classroom context as well, because every support that is developed has to work within that specific classroom. On the next level, the outer circle with the light green arrows refers to the broader school community. Concretely, this means that the support that is developed for a particular learner in a particular classroom need also to be translated in the full school context. For example, a child with sensory integration issues should not get punished for running out of a noisy lunchroom. You can see that at every level, continuous communication and collaboration is the driver of this cyclical process. And then the next slide. So next, I would like to share a few insights about what is important in collaborative working and thinking at the system level. First, the leaders of the learning support centers need to have a solid vision on inclusion. That is first things first. If they don't have that, they have to develop this vision. And then it's also essential to have structurally built-in collaboration time in every school. Because when the leaders of the school cannot manage this, there will be no communication between the teacher and the support. Also, expertise, a new knowledge repertoire, grows out of interaction between stakeholders. So learning as a social participation. Collaborative relationships always hold the possibility of creating new knowledge independent of age, experience, of background. This is also what Kathleen was talking about. Team teaching can give teachers oxygen, notably on one-on-one time to build relationships with the pupil. For example, learning support person takes over a class for 15 minutes, and then the classroom teacher can go in interaction with the pupil with special needs. Sharing positive examples of the learner in action, such as photos, videos, texts. So sharing this with families, but also colleagues, changes the narrative and opens the door for collaboration. And then also seeing pupils as the responsibility of the whole school community versus a single teacher, and looking for solutions in that broad context is very important. You have to think out of the box. For example, in a difficult class moment, like being assistant, the pupil may be an assistant of the handyman of the school by cleaning up the leaves of the trees in autumn, or making copies in the administration room with the secretary. And we can find a lot of other examples who grows within the dialogue with the parent, with the teacher, with the support person. And then last but not least, no pupil or person ever reaches the ceiling of their learning, academically, socially, or emotionally. I hope that this message is coming in.
Thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely fascinating to hear how you're working and how that is structured. And of course, there, as you say, there are very many points corresponding with what Kathleen has also said. And you've brought out some very important points. And it's very interesting to see how you have structured that around these resource learning centres. So I would wonder if anybody has a question, please, for Mieke. If you do, we will take those at the end. If that's all right with you, Mieke. I thought we would have both presentations, and then please keep in your head any questions you have for Mieke, write them in the chat, and we'll be able to deal with them later on. Sorry, in the question and answer, getting it wrong again. And we will deal with everything together at the end of the next speaker. Thank you. So that was absolutely fascinating and really interesting. And there are lots of points there that I could bring out, but I wait. So Mieke, thank you very much again. And we look forward to chatting with you more towards the end. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I would now like to invite our third and final speaker for today to talk to us. And that is Miss Bodil Hafsås. Bodil is the representative board member for Norway in the agency. That means we engage with Bodil for things that when we're working with Norway in the agency. And she also works in the Ministry of Education in the Department for Kindergartens and Schools. During her 17 years in the ministry, Bodil has gained very wide experience of having worked in many areas, including agency management and the state budget in the area of kindergartens and schools, in the governance of the municipal sector, in policy development, particularly related to inclusive education and children with special needs. Another area is changes and restructuring of the national support system for children with special needs. Her current position is as a project manager for a white paper on social inclusion and social mobility, which is a cooperation between 5 ministries. So, Bodil, you have enormous experience around policy development and experience at ministry level. So I'm delighted that you were able to be with us today. Thank you so much. And we're very much looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for the invitation and the chance to share some experiences from collaboration across sectors at a national level and in Norway. I will now share my presentation first here. Like this. You can see the whole screen now, right?
Yes, we can see your slides down the left-hand side, but if you're happy with that, it's absolutely fine.
Oh, because
I think we've all had this problem today, Bodil.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's an issue with Zoom, or you can go to full screen, but then you might not see your own notes.
Okay, because this helped? No.
Same.
Same. Okay, then it's okay.
Happy? Okay, thank you.
My presentation will concentrate on structures and processes to meet challenges that occur when we try to find solutions across sectors. I will tell you about this current work that Diana told you about, a white paper. This is a government report to the Parliament. This is not yet launched, so I can't get into details of the policies, but I will focus on process involving 5 ministries and the background for the work. So I will share experiences from national policy development processes, but I think these experiences can also be relevant for cross-sectoral collaboration on all levels, really. I'll just briefly take you through a few facts on the Norwegian system for context. Norway is quite a big country, but with few people. So this means we have a lot of space, but also long distances in some areas. If you go from Oslo to the far north of Norway, it is more or less the same distance as if you go from Oslo to northern Italy. We have quite many municipalities and also 15 counties on the regional level. And local governments in Norway have significant autonomy to make decisions on local matters. They have the authority to levy taxes and manage their budgets, which allows them to tailor services to the needs of their communities. While local governments have considerable independence, they are still subject to oversight by the central government. This ensures that national standards and policies are maintained across the country, and the central government can govern the municipalities mainly through law and funding. And these municipalities differ in many ways. They have very different sizes in population size. They have different geography. Some are rural, some are cities, and the demographic composition is also different between the municipalities. Despite these differences providing various conditions for the municipalities, the same legal requirements apply to all municipalities. This creates a range of challenges for the municipalities, but also for the state, trying to steer such a heterogeneous group of municipalities. There are some common challenges that we can see across different sectors. And one common factor is that the shortage of labor is a constant problem especially in welfare services. Projections show that we will lack people in healthcare services and other essential welfare services such as kindergartens and schools. And this means that we have to work smarter and use the resources more effectively. So before we run out of money, we run out of hands. The next point is that the sectors are mutually dependent on each other to obtain their own goals. Complex challenges across sectors need comprehensive solutions. People are not divided into sectors. To give good services, we need to see the whole human being. Another challenge is that there is too much emphasis on fixing problems rather than preventing them. This leads to inefficient use of resources. There are several reasons for this, and it's not easy to change. And I want to give just one example. The local support system for pupils with special needs, called Pedagogical Psychological Service, has two main tasks. They must provide individual assessments to find out whether a student needs special education. The other task is to support kindergartens and schools on system level to ensure good and inclusive learning environments, where as many as possible receive the support they need within the regular provision. And the capacity of this pedagogical psychological service is overwhelmed, so they are stuck in a pattern with too many individual assessments, which takes capacity away from work at the system level, leading to the need for more individual assessments instead of preventing them. It becomes a vicious cycle.
Excuse me, Bodil. I'm not sure if you want to advance your slides, but we're still actually looking at your first slide. Is that what you intend?
No, I have changed slides, but not in your...
No, nothing's changed. I can ask one of my colleagues if they can help you with this. Gamze or Maria, can you assist with this, please?
Bodil's PowerPoint, so if Bodil, you just... Yes, I will share it from my computer.
Good.
Sorry, Bodil. There always seem to be technical problems, don't there? Thank you, Gamze. Is this where you would like to be, Bodil? Is this the slide you want to? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Gamze.
So, and this the result is that too many children experience that they get help too late or that they don't get help at all. And moreover, when they do get help, and often they will need support from different services, they too often experience uncoordinated and fragmented services, and parents often need to take the coordinating role. You can go to the next slide. So, what do we need then? We need to put the user in the center to give comprehensive services. We need to see the whole person. In our context, this is children and young people. And for example, when a student has a problem at home, she or he will have these problems even when they're at school. It's not like these problems disappear when they're at school. Issues at home can significantly impact a student's well-being and performance at school. And the school can provide guidance and support, but the school can't fix all the problems. And it needs to cooperate with other services so that the student and the family can get comprehensive support and maybe fix the core problem. I think you are still on the wrong slide. I'm on 4 now.
Bodil, we can see cross-sectoral collaboration a necessity.
Oh, okay. So it's just me.
Right? I'm sorry. Does this mean you can't see your own slides? I'm sorry, that's very awkward. If Gamze will forward them, she will wait for you to tell her when to move forward, if that's helpful.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's okay. No problem. So as I mentioned earlier, I just have to find back to where I was. I think as I mentioned earlier, we need to make the most out of the resources we have, and the sectors must collaborate to better utilize the combined capacity and expertise. And we will not have enough hands if we don't. We need to identify challenges early and prevent them from growing into major problems that require extensive help. And all this is, of course, not easy. And we have obstacles in different levels. You can go to the next slide. The municipalities are responsible for most welfare services in our country, and they have duties and tasks that are established by laws and regulations, and they are largely funded through government transfers. While some improvements have been made to the legislation in recent years, including harmonizing the laws for the various welfare sectors regarding duty to cooperate with other services, it is still the case that the regulations that municipalities must adhere to are sectorized. And when it comes to funding, the main rule is that they're funded by a block grant, but the state also has many special grants that municipalities can apply for. And these grants are often targeted at special groups and issues, and they are sectorized. This also means that monitoring and reporting occurs sector-wise. And this is resource intensive for both the municipalities and the state. And divergent requirements and fragmented initiatives from the national level can pose significant challenges in governance and policy implementation. It makes it difficult to prioritize between initiatives, and the initiatives are not necessarily aligned with local needs. This situation is reinforced by a sectorized organization at local level, and the ability to collaborate across sectors at the local level can also be restrained by a lack of competence and capacity in the services. So, next slide. So, why do we mess it up like this from the national level? Well, firstly, the state is also organized into different sectors in silos. The ministers are responsible for their respective sectors, both constitutionally and politically. Problems that shows up in one sector renders a call for action from the ministers responsible for that sector, even if the problem may be a consequence of problems in other sectors. And in a fast-paced media environment, it is often difficult to convey thorough analysis and holistic thinking. But as you can see, children are best off outside the silos. They don't fit into one of them, and they're not divided into sectors. And problems don't divide nicely into sectors either. We have to find solutions in between the sectors or silos, which brings me to the next slide. Providing children and young people with comprehensive and effective support has been a work that has been, or something that has been worked on for a long time. We have tried to address these challenges within the welfare sectors, such as education, health, etc. And we have also had projects and programs where multiple ministries and directorates have attempted to work together. So this is a long-term commitment. And in 2021, the government launched a common strategy aimed at all the ministries. It's named Good on Our Own, Best Together. One of the main pillars in the strategy is better cross-sectoral collaboration. And to follow up this strategy, there was established a set of so-called core groups. These core groups have representations from a set of ministries, and they're characterized by top-level anchoring. Those who represent the ministries are secretary generals or director generals. So it's right on the top. The groups are established to work on areas that require strategic and coordinated efforts over time, often wicked problems. And one of them is the core group of vulnerable children and young people. And through the core group structure, the ministries test new ways to collaborate and improve in coordination to ensure that their responsibilities, policies, etc. are coercive and targeted. And the aim is to collaborate on the level that is suitable for the task, often referred to as the collaboration ladder. Each step on this ladder involves tighter collaboration. And the lowest step is a good starting point, sharing information that is relevant for the other actors. And then we go through developing joint problem understanding and awareness of possible goal conflicts to developing joint plans and targets and joint policy making. The core group on vulnerable children and young people has activities on all levels of this collaboration ladder, but there has been a challenge that this structure is insufficiently connected to the political level. Thus, real joint policymaking has been difficult to obtain. So that's why the idea of a common white paper among several ministries emerged. Next slide. Some of these Secretary Generals from the core group came together and recommended to the political leadership a joint effort against social inequality and in collaboration between several ministries. And this was applauded by the politicians, and soon the decision was made to develop a white paper together. And this was to be a joint project between 5 ministries: the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion, Children and Families, Health and Care Services, Culture and Equality, and Education and Research. This work required structures that ensured cooperation between the ministries and anchoring in the various ministries, as well as in a unified political leadership. So we established a project team with representatives from all ministries, a steering committee with director generals from all 5 ministries, and a group of state secretaries from all 5 ministries, the political level. And we've even had meetings with all 5 ministers a couple of times. So we all have shared responsibility in this work. None of the ministers has the leading role. We have distributed the different roles in the project on different ministries. I am the project manager from the Ministry of Education and Research. I have an assistant manager coming from the Ministry of Health and Care Services. The leader of the steering group is from the Ministry of Labour and Social Inclusion, etc. So, next slide. So, why is this paper on social equality and mobility? As I said, one of the main goals of the current government is to reduce social inequalities and ensure social mobility. And Norway is a country with less inequalities than many other countries, but it is still rising. And where you come from has too much impact on how you make it in life. And challenging living conditions are passed down to next generation. And we see that too many young people are neither in education, employment, or training, so-called needs. This has obviously severe consequences for individuals, but also means large costs and consequences for the society as a whole. Next slide. The main goals of this white paper are early intervention, with a special emphasis on the first 1,000 days in a child's life, including life before birth. It is good conditions for growing up. The children must have good lives when they are children. Childhood has an intrinsic value, but it is also about giving equal possibilities for all children and young people, irrespective of social background. It is a goal also to obtain better cooperation between arenas and services aimed at children and young people. And here are some of the measures that we are discussing. I'm not going into detail on this, but we are discussing different support for families to ensure a good start in life. We are discussing measures to give better access to kindergartens and increase staff to ensure quality, better access to leisure activities for all. We have a work on common national initiatives and financing, and common research structures, and also joint programs on competence development. This white paper is to be launched this spring, so this is a sneak peek into something that is common. So finally, some lessons learned. I think that these lessons from work at the national level can be relevant for any level of the system. I'll say something about the challenges first. We have experienced that priorities hurt. We have, for example, an effort on going from many sector-oriented grants, as I was talking about earlier, tailored at different specific needs within a sector, going to a common or joint grant aimed at vulnerable children as such. And everyone agrees in theory, but in practice it's still difficult due to the need to prioritize across sectors. And it is a challenge with limited resources to prioritize work that does not manifest a direct outcome in your own sector. And each ministry also has its own cultures and logics, despite being part of the same system. And I guess that's true for all levels. And we have to make use to take time to get to know each other, both colleagues and routines, and we need to find new ways of doing things, ways that we all can live with. I think that the positive experiences from this process is that high-level anchoring makes it more effective to come to conclusions and to make decisions. And so leadership is important, and also when it comes to expectations from the leadership of an organization to the whole organization, that we should prioritize cooperation. Another thing is that structures matter. Collaboration doesn't just happen by chance. We have to have structures that makes this cooperation possible, and that you have capacity and time to actually do this collaboration. And I think that our experiences in shared leadership is quite interesting. I think it gives a shared commitment and more actual collaboration. For example, cooperation between ministries on white papers is not new, but the normal model is one responsible ministry leading the process. But then the interest in other ministries is limited. And I think that it's a key element in our project that we have a distributed and joint responsibility. Though we are always in danger of energy loss and lack of interest in processes like this. But I think that last but not least, a message can be that in collaboration processes across sectors, we must be patient, and collaboration must be practiced again and again, and to improve step by step, and come closer together through practice. Yeah, thank you.
Bodil, thank you very much indeed, and thank you really for sharing, what is high-level policy making that's still in development, and being so open about the challenges that you're facing and some of the difficulties. But it's so interesting to see how you're working through those, and that your sectors can come together. I'm sure the policymakers who are listening to what you have to say will be really interested in the way you're developing this model. And I presume that it could then filter down to, sort of more regional levels, not in Norway, but elsewhere. They might think about some of the issues that you're facing and how you've done this at other levels. So thank you very much indeed. I apologize that we created some technical issues for you. I hope that wasn't too awkward. But I would now like to invite those who are participating and listening, if they have questions, please, for these two last speakers or any additional points that you want to raise. Bodil and Mieke are here to answer your questions, listen to your comments or whatever. If you are able to put those directly into the question and answer feature, that would be helpful. Thank you. Mieke, there's possibly one that you have received already, I think. I don't know if that's something that you want to share with everybody. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first, there are no pupils in the learning centers. Maybe that was not that clear. So the pupils are in the schools and not in the centers. Yeah? And there are different types of children who have support from the support centers. How I will say that the questions that come, there are there are also other support centers of support services, not only a support center, but there's for instance a support service that looks which children need support from a support center. And then when they gave a go, the support center, the school can ask the support center for help for these children. So it's important to know that the children are not in the centers. The children are in the schools, and the children with special needs can have support from a support center, but there is also a support service who can help figure out which pupil must have support. Is that clear enough? My English is better when I can read it. Oh, I cannot hear you. Sorry.
Yes, no, that was very clear. Thank you. Yes, the question was, I think that some participants maybe thought that the learners were also in the resource centers. Yeah. So no, that was very clear. Thank you.
So for instance, the pupils with the language barriers, that was also the question. When there are pupils with a language barrier and also another special need, they can have support, but only support for children with language barriers. There is another service that can help those children. Other money also. It's about subsidies, Kathleen.
Subsidies.
Financial support. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because in relation to what Bodil has said, do you have collaboration between these different sectors that are dealing with children with a range of different needs, for example?
Yeah. This is the decree is the help is for the children with special needs, and when we have children with language barriers and they have also special needs, they can get help from the support center. When if they only have language barriers, they can have support from another financial source. Yeah. There are the schools who have a lot of children with language barriers. They can get financial support from the government that give those schools, but they can themselves organize the help for those children at the school. That it's not from another support center that come to help those children.
So the schools have got quite a high level of autonomy then in their decisions around this. Yeah. So that's an interesting, that might be slightly different than some of the other countries. Yeah.
They can finance a teacher who can work with those children with language barriers.
Right. Yeah. And no, that's very interesting. So I think in relation to questions earlier from some of the participants, that within our project, one of the issues we're looking at is regional disparities in addressing some of the challenges that some regions have, which maybe don't occur in the same way in other regions, about enabling resourcing and support for different types of pupils. So some areas might have a great deal of migrant learners, for example, and other areas fewer. So that's an interesting way to look at it. Bodil, I have a question here in front of me from a participant. The participant is wondering if you're able to give an example of one of the how these competing priorities get in the way of the common cross-sectoral initiatives. It was in your list of challenges that I can see how, when previously you've been working in a model that everybody has a different sector, and now, as I understand it, sort of financial resources are being pooled, and that inevitably means that some things in my sector, for example, might not be addressed. So I think this person is interesting to know if you've got an example of that and how that has been really, what solution you found for that.
Yes, I can say something about this work on this joint grant that I've talked about already. And the challenges there is that we have all these sectorized grants that are all kind of argumented for. It's like there are good arguments to have these grants. There are real problems that they're trying to solve. But the problem is that when the municipalities have all these, we have like 130 something grants aiming at children and young people, especially in vulnerable situations, which is too much. It's too much for the municipalities. And then if we then want to make a joint grant, that means that the specific aims will have to they will not disappear, but they will not be forced by the national level. So it gives freedom to the local level. But for a politician, that can be, for a national politician, that can be difficult, because then you also say that, oh, this is not so important. So it's up to the municipalities. So when it comes to, so as I said, the principle, everyone can agree in principle, but when it comes to finding these grants that we can just swipe away and put into this bigger grant, then it's more difficult. Like, for example, in our ministry, we have a grant for supporting learning for minorities with from different countries, who are not speaking Norwegian as a mother's tongue, and then we can quit this grant and put it into this big grant and hope that the municipalities will cope and will see what they need. And it's difficult for the politicians to take these to take away something to give something else, and to give away power. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I'm sure other people who are working in these types of areas and who are listening will be really interested in this. And what intrigues me is that from all three of our speakers, I think the essence of collaboration and coordination in this is a change in thinking, isn't it? It comes down to even whether you're working, like in Kathleen was saying, at school and individual level, or in more regional municipal levels, or indeed at national level. This is the elements have to be the same. It's dialogue, it's trust, it's being prepared perhaps to give something up, it's listening to the other point of view. I like it in your model where you've got everybody has shared responsibility, and that no single person is I think you said not one ministry is over another ministry. I mean, that's really as a model for sort of equality, which is mirrored further down, isn't it? So when parents and learners and teachers meet together, it's not that I'm the expert telling somebody, it's that everybody knows the best for themselves, as it were, and that knowledge is pooled. And I suppose if one scales that up, that becomes to what is being done at policy level. And I don't know how you feel about when it's all rolled out, if you think it's a model that there's potential that you might do this in other sectors, and perhaps that's not a fair question because obviously that's for the future, but it's such a good initiative, and it's so different, and it's really inspirational to think that might work, because I think in education, as you said before, excuse me, it's not just what's going on in school, it's what's going on at home, it's what's going on in health, it's what's going everywhere. And both Mieke and Kathleen have said something exactly the same in a different way and in a different context. I would just like to ask if anybody has got any more questions, would they please put them in now? And I would like to pass to Gamza, who's going to remind you about the survey. Gamza, would you like to do that now?
Yes, I will. I'm just about to add the link into the chat for everyone to see. We have a feedback survey which we very much would like you to respond on to. So in a second we will share a link with you in the chat. It will take 2 minutes of your time to fill it out. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you, Gamza. So we very much like your feedback. This is really interesting for us to know how you have found our webinar, whether you find it interesting and informative. And thank you very much for doing that as part of our work with SG Reform about how we conduct these webinars. And that would really, your input for that would be really helpful. Thank you. So we do have a little bit more time. If anybody has another question to put to any of our three speakers, perhaps you have one that you thought of later for Mieke or for Kathleen or for Bodil in the last few minutes. This is an ideal opportunity. It's a great pleasure and a privilege for us to be able to bring together people working in this way at 3 different levels around collaboration and cross-sectoral thinking and working. And thinking is obviously very key to this as well. And I think, interestingly, perhaps how do we change people's thinkings is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And that I can see can start bottom up, right down with individual teachers, families and learners and schools and classrooms, and then go out more widely, as you said, Mieke, so the whole school is involved. I very much like your analogy that if a child has sensory difficulties, he can't really be punished for wanting to run out of a very noisy dining room. And that's a really interesting example, I think, of how it's everybody's responsibility in the school to know what is needed, to understand and to collaborate together and think, how can we all contribute to making things better for this child and for all other children? And then scaling up again, Bodil, so up at the ministry level, working, and with the support from the top is needed, because clearly top and bottom have to meet up. It's got to be integrated, so people are not working individually, struggling against the system which is not supporting them from above. And that's why what you're doing in Norway is absolutely critical and a wonderful example of how ministries can collaborate and actually not only be aware of what they're all doing, but really work together and share their resources and work together to meet the challenges or try to meet the challenges, but also, as you quite clearly have said, new challenges emerge just in the very process. But as you have said, it requires practice, and practice means doing it. And that's really in terms of collaboration and working with other people and coordinating cross-sectorally or even with one other person. You can perhaps learn how to do it once you do it, when things are in place. And I think all three of our speakers have said that it works. When it's done and you work at it and everybody is willing, it can work. So I will give everybody the last remaining minutes to put up any questions they might have, please. And if not, please do fill out the survey. That would be really good. It will only take a couple of minutes of your time. And thank you to all our three speakers. It's really been a privilege and it's been exceptionally interesting. And thank you for doing all the work that you've done in bringing three fascinating presentations to us. So I really would like to thank you, Bodil, Mieke and Kathleen, for the work you've done on this. Thank you. So there's there are thanks in the chat, I know, to you all. And I think people have really enjoyed this. And this is coming up in Spanish and Italian and Portuguese. So I'm a little bit limited, but I think my general impression is that people have really enjoyed this and they are thanking you and they have found it very interesting. And your commitment here, you have a message. No school is an island. And you have been thanked very much for your commitment to this whole, the work that you're doing and to make inclusive education go forward for everybody. Thank you. Yeah, another person saying thank you for the presentations. They were most interesting. So we just remain here for a couple of minutes and just so people have time to fill out the survey questionnaire.
Maybe if I can, thanks, Diana, for, kind of finding the connecting points between the presentations. And I thought that was really interesting. To me, what stands out is it's both the structures need to be in place and the trust needs to be there. So those, I think, are two main components. And there's nobody with the answers and the knowledge.
No.
So we're, so those points like really work at every level. And I think it's important because I know we gave examples from special education, but I know, we all are now working in schools that are very diverse and but this kind of thinking is going to be important for all students, for all learners. What does this learner need and how can we find these simple solutions? This is not about big, complicated things. How can we find something that works? How much time can the student spend outside of the class if there's that time needed? And maybe somebody who knows this other language, even though we don't have interpreters, can help us figure something out and have a short conversation. So it's finding these practical small solutions rather than the big structures within the schools, but there needs to be time to collaborate. So yeah. So, well, thank you for having us. And I hope that people take this back and just start seeing possibilities instead of just thinking, oh, that's not going to work. That's going to be too complicated. We don't have the structure. Like how, because in every school that we've worked in every system, it's just starts from somewhere and you start breaking in with just, small examples with one at a time and finding ways to collaborate and to move it forward. So I really enjoyed the other speakers. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And yes, I think you're absolutely right. And of course, everybody can learn from everybody else, as it were, which is really what we're doing here today. We're sharing this knowledge. And we hope that, the participants will take these ideas back into their own contexts and move forward with this. And I think what you've just said is, if it's just one person doing one thing, you can start the ball rolling in your class or in your school or whatever. And then if we can, Norway, Bodil, perhaps you can be example at policy level for how actually one can overcome this breakdown of sectors and changing of the funding model and all these large things that have to be in place. to make changes as well, policy at national level and then possibly at regional level as well. So we are very grateful. So I think if everybody is done, I think we will close here. And I see no more questions. More thanks to you. I think that's... Mieke, is there a question? Are you still there? If there's a question for you to answer,
Yes.
would you like to do that? Have you seen a question?
No, I didn't see it. In the chat or in the Q&A?
It's in the Q&A, sorry. It's the bottom one in the Q&A.
The last one?
Yeah, from Antonio Cabrera. Do you see it?
Yeah, I see it in Spanish.
It's in Spanish, yeah. I think if I've understood it correctly, it's a very interesting experience about that they will think about to give them points for reflection in their city. And she is saying that the example from Norway has given them many ideas. So, and the previous one, which may be for you, Mieke, was, this is in Portuguese, which I'm not quite so good at. I think it's many thanks for the ideas and everything that you've put forward in your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't know if you wanted to elaborate on anything. I don't think there's a specific point to be answered there.
The solution is in the dialogue.
Yeah, there we go. Dialogue, that's it.
Yeah, the solution doesn't exist at the moment, but comes out in the dialogue. Yeah. Yeah,
and a sort of a level playing field. I think the question of the shared responsibility and shared leadership is really, whatever level it's at, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry. The writer is saying, thank you, Rosario. She says, thank you all. It's not a question, it's a thank you. There we go.
Okay.
So I think we'll close it there. So I would like to thank you again to our three speakers, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. And we look forward to perhaps seeing you at our third webinar in due course. So thank you all very much. Bye.